I remember so clearly the day that Kurt Cobain died. I was in 7th grade, I was 13, and everyone was talking about it at school. It's all over MTV. But what I remember most was I went to youth group that night. I was a devout Christian, grew up going to an evangelical church, and just started going to a youth group. I was just a few months into being 13 and didn't really know anyone, even though I grew up going to that church. I just didn't really feel that connected to anybody at my church. I was much tighter friends with my friends at school. But anyhow, I was at youth group and I remember it so clear. I had my hair down the middle, kind of like now, straight. It was burgundy, very trendy at the time. I was wearing very oversized clothes, probably some Chuck Taylors. I had this like little mini backpack and I had my Snapple bottle in it and probably some like plastic rings. And my youth pastor decided to tell us all that night how he believed and was definite that Kurt Cobain went to hell for killing himself and that God absolutely hated his music and what he stood for. That God probably loved him, but absolutely despised everything that he was about. That night was imprinted on my mind forever, and little did I know it would be a really pivotal moment in my teen years that would alter and shape the way I went. At that time, I wasn't this huge Nirvana fan. I knew him. I saw Smells Like Teen Spirit a zillion times on MTV, but I was still listening more to R&B and some pop music and still figuring out who I was and what I was into. But that night opened this door and led me down a path that would forever change my life. That night I started to take way more interest in Nirvana, and as I got more into Nirvana, I would start to feel. I started to open Pandora's box. I was 13, I was hormonal, dealing with some of the natural traumas that had happened at that age. And I started to begin to isolate. I quit going to church. I started to open myself up to more rock music. Then it would be punk, then it'd be hardcore. And I go down this whole path in which all that music would lead me down and spiral into the depths of my being. I would lay in bed. I'd have this like Hot Topic looking neon glow-in-the-dark lights stuck to my ceiling. I'd have bead curtain. I'd start lighting incense. I had posters everywhere in my room. And when my parents went to bed, I'd play my music really loud. I'm surprised they let me. But I'd listen to my music and I'd just lay in my bed and I would just think and I'd feel and I'd cry. Sometimes I would journal. And I started to get deep inside of myself in a way that I never obviously did as a child. But I started to go down into the ethers of my being and start to explore these feelings. And I realized that music would be this segue and this invitation to go into the darkness of my soul, to feel the tragedies of life, to cry about nothing, to, feel these different realms of humanity. And I would lay there night after night after calling my friends and I would just break open sometimes. Sometimes I had a lot to be sad about and sometimes I just wanted to be sad. And that's what that music taught me. Heart-shaped box would just like, it would just like stir something up in me that was just only that music could do. And then it would be Eddie Vedder with Pearl Jam, and it'd be more and more music would just break me open. And I loved it. I craved it. And before I knew it, I was deeply entrenched into my own darkness. I was now entering these very dark areas. I started to dress more gothic. I had black hair. I was wearing all black. And I was experimenting with this this very unknown side of myself. I'm amazed that my parents were fairly accepting of it, and it was trendy. I wasn't original by any means, though there wasn't many other students at my school that were into this stuff. There was, a handful of us girls that really like being kind of gothy and shocking and experimental and self-sabotaging. And what it was is that we were tuning into our dark feminine nature. We were going into the underbelly and wanting to explore the mysteries of who we are. And just like anyone that goes into the dark path for a while, you start to get lost. It not only started to become this like entertaining thing, but it started to become a haunted house. It started to lead me into some very scary places. And I started to open myself up to things that I thought I'd never be open to, having been a former Christian. Or I didn't think I was a Christian at that point anymore. And I liked entertaining the other sides, but it came at a price. And like a lot of teens, I did all the things teens do, got myself in all different troubles, put my parents through hell, and was out of control on purpose. It was by design. I knew what I was doing. I wanted to push into all those things that the good girl was supposed to never touch. I wanted to explore that center. If Jesus couldn't love Kurt Cobain, then I was gonna push into that and see if Jesus could love me. And I was told I was already free, but yet I had to abide by this law and be this saint of a girl. And I didn't want to. I was like, fuck that. I want to understand what it's like to be human and to play with temptation and explore all different parts of myself. So I did. And when it got to be too much, when the consequences became super painful, when I put my family through enough hell, I agreed to go back to church. I came to my knees and felt so guilty and felt like I was pushing the edge too far at that point, risking everyone's life, really starting to put pain on my family. And so I went back to church. I went to a different church. I was now 17, almost 18. And at that point I was going to punk shows, skateboarded. I was rough and tough and had done everything. And I felt like such a dork going back to church, but I was honestly scared. I was scared not to get myself checked and to put myself back in church because I was pushing the envelope so far. And so I went back to church, and lo and behold, my new youth pastor would be just like the old youth pastor, encouraging us to burn and break our CDs and to get rid of secular music and to completely give ourselves over to Jesus music. And in desperation, I did it. I broke thousands of dollars worth of CDs and this huge collection I was so happy to have built. It saved all my babysitting money and stomped and broke my CDs, feeling God had led me to do this in order to correct myself and go return to the light, to be saved. And it would create this very, for lack of a better word, bipolar experience for me. I felt like a nerd going back to church, but I felt like I had no choice to go back to church and to save myself and to correct all the wrongs I had done. And I become such a nerd about it, trying to still be cool and go to punk shows and yet find my way. And I made a few friends in the church scene that seemed cool enough. And I was living between these two dualities of, I want to be cool, I want to be dark, but then I also don't want to get myself in too much trouble, and I need to be like completely suspended and focused on Jesus. So I had this very like bipolar, paradoxical life. And that lasted for years. After high school, I was wanting to be one thing, but still trying to give myself to Jesus, living this very dualistic life And it was very confusing because I wanted to have sex, I wanted to drink, but I also wanted to follow Jesus. And I felt like you got to pick one, but I don't fit into one. I don't agree with one way. I understand the other. And isn't life about the whole thing? So finally, in my mid to late 20s, I went through a big spiritual awakening, and I decided to pretty much formally take a big C away from my Christian views and start looking Eastern. And I started following the Taoistic view, Taoism, which made sense. I felt bipolar. I felt like I understood this side and I understood this side, and the Tao was bringing me to this happy middle road, this middle way of learning that life feels this and that, and who I am is not wrong. And I started to find equanimity and balance, and I started to find a lot of self-acceptance, and I quit viewing any side of myself as wrong, and found a lot of peace. But then that wouldn't be enough. I would have to go much further. And I started to study the real meaning of Nirvana. And over the last few years, my journey has taken me into more of a non-dual place of one being, but realizing I am not this story and this character that's been trying to find herself, make sense of her human dynamics, this character, this avatar. I started to finally realize this awareness. I'm this beingness, this uncontained being. It seems to sit behind the eyes or around the eyes because that's the viewpoint, but it also sometimes feels like it emanates from the heart. It just seems like it connects so much deeper with nature and other people and music and other things right from here. And I started to realize this is who I am. This grand story that I supposedly have lived brought me to this. And so then I recognized that these paths that I went on were perfect. They were holy paths. And I started to realize that I'm actually not the character. I'm this divine being. And as a divine being, I came to be limited, to be confined, to live in this one vessel as Candace. And as Kurt Cobain would teach me, I wanted to feel the depths and the sourness and the heaviness and the grief and the drudgery of life, as well as all the rest. I wanted the whole shebang. I wanted this unique story in order to experience the existence of a human. I'm unlimited after all. So I came to experience life in the 21st century as this ordinary girl doing this thing called life. But just like the darkness, when you start exploring it, you can get very lost. So yes, I came to explore it, but then I needed a way out. I needed a way to remember who I was beyond just this form. And so I would give myself the light, Jesus, these brilliant beings to remind me to look beyond the cave and the abyss and to remember that there's more. And so while I got irritated with my Christian pastors, the truth of the matter is they were just as relevant as Kurt Cobain. They were all perfect. They were all streams of light guiding me to who I am, to find Nirvana, to find the nothingness, the stillness, the beingness. I would be able to just come as I am.